I was fired for refusing to hand over a USB 5 minutes before a $240 million meeting, and somehow, I was the only one who understood what would happen next. My name is Ophelia Reed, Senior Data Integrity Manager. I don't create numbers, I make them legally real. For 6 years. I built the validation system that stood between our company and regulatory disaster. Every deal, every projection, every polished slide meant nothing until it passed through my certification. Quiet work, invisible power. Trevor Madigan, our Chief Operations Officer, preferred speed over structure. He called me a bottleneck in meetings, usually right after taking credit for systems he didn't understand. That morning, he decided control mattered more than compliance. "Give me the USB," he said, in front of executives, legal counsel, and the very investors we were about to face. "That device is tied to my legal authorization." I replied, "You don't get to use it." He didn't hesitate. "Then you're done here." Just like that, 6 years erased in one sentence. No warning, no discussion, just a public dismissal designed to prove a point. What Trevor didn't realize, what no one in that room seemed to realize, was that the USB he demanded didn't hold the data. It held the only thing that made the data valid. And in less than 5 minutes, when that meeting began, he wasn't going to lose control. He was going to lose something far worse: credibility. Before we go any further, take a moment to subscribe, but only if you believe in knowing your worth and never giving it away. I'd also love to know where you're listening from and what the temperature is like there right now. This is a fictional story, with some elements enhanced by artificial intelligence to make it more vivid and emotionally engaging. Now, let me take you back and show you how everything really unfolded. I didn't argue when he fired me, because 6 years of work had already taught me something Trevor Madigan never understood. Power doesn't need volume to exist. For 6 years. I built the validation system that every major deal depended on. Quietly, methodically. I designed layers that could trace every number back to its origin, flag inconsistencies, and lock anything that didn't meet regulatory standards. It wasn't glamorous, but it prevented 3 major fraud attempts, close to $80 million in exposure, without anyone outside compliance ever noticing. Trevor noticed only when it slowed him down. He liked shortcuts. "Skip validation," he would say, like it was a minor inconvenience instead of a legal boundary. I said no every time, not loudly, not dramatically, just consistently. And every time I did, I became, in his words, a bottleneck. What he never mentioned was how often that bottleneck saved him. During the last audit, when discrepancies started surfacing, it was my system that caught them early. My report that gave legal enough time to respond. My signature that kept his name off the escalation list. He shook my hand after that, called me essential, until I wasn't. Walking away now. I realized the irony wasn't subtle, it was structural. He valued control over understanding, speed over verification, and he truly believed the USB he demanded was just storage. It wasn't. It never was. The device in my pocket didn't carry data, it carried permission. I didn't drive away right after I left the building. I sat in my car, laptop open, watching the system do exactly what it was designed to do, nothing more, nothing less. The dashboard loaded in silence, no alarms, no dramatic failures, just clean, precise status indicators shifting one by one. The deal pipeline that had been marked ready minutes ago was now quietly changing its state. Verification pending, data not certified. I leaned back, letting the pattern unfold. This wasn't chaos. It was correction. Without the authentication token stored on my USB, the system had no legal confirmation that the data presented was accurate, complete, or approved. Every dataset tied to that meeting automatically fell into a suspended state, not deleted, not corrupted, just unusable. That was the difference Trevor never understood. I didn't control the data. I controlled whether it could be trusted. Another update refreshed on the screen. Internal users were attempting to push the process forward manually. I could see the sequence clearly: access requests, validation retries, escalation flags. Someone was getting impatient. Then it appeared, override attempt initiated. I watched the timestamp, already knowing how the system would respond. The architecture I built didn't block action, it recorded intent. A second later, the log updated. Unauthorized attempt detected. I exhaled slowly, not out of relief, but recognition. The system wasn't protecting me, it wasn't punishing him, it was simply documenting reality in real time. Every action left a trace. Every shortcut created evidence. And Trevor had just written his own. More alerts followed, each one stacking onto the last, like a quiet indictment. Compliance flags, audit triggers, automated notifications routing themselves to departments that didn't ignore patterns like this. I closed the laptop halfway, but didn't shut it. There was no need to intervene. The system was already speaking. And this time, everyone was going to hear it clearly. The meeting began without me. Exactly on schedule. As if nothing essential had been removed. I could see it through the live dashboard feed presentation active. Attendees logged in. The usual rhythm of confidence moving forward. At first, everything looked normal. Slides advanced smoothly. Charts displayed projected growth. Clean margins. Confident forecasts. Trevor's voice came through the system audio steady. Controlled. Almost rehearsed. If you didn't know better, you'd think nothing had changed. For a moment. Even I almost believed it. Then the first disruption arrived. Quiet and precise. An investor leaned forward, his voice cutting through the presentation with a question that didn't sound aggressive. Just necessary. Has this been validated? There was a pause. Not long, but long enough. I watched the participant list shift slightly as attention moved away from the slides and toward Trevor. He didn't answer immediately. That hesitation told me everything. Then the CFO spoke. We don't have the verification key. The room didn't erupt. It didn't need to. Silence, in situations like this, carries more weight than panic. Trevor tried to recover. Moving to the next slide. Reframing the numbers as if confidence alone could replace process. But the system doesn't respond to confidence. The legal counsel didn't even look at the screen when she spoke. Then legally, this presentation cannot be used for decision-making. That was the moment the structure collapsed. Not visibly, not dramatically, just decisively. The investors didn't argue. They didn't accuse. One of them simply closed his folder. We'll have to pause here. $240 million. Reduced to a delay with a single sentence. No raised voices. No confrontation. Just the quiet recognition that nothing in that room could be trusted without verification. I watched Trevor's feed freeze for a fraction of a second, just long enough to see the realization land. Not anger. Not yet. Just understanding. And by then, it was already too late, because the meeting hadn't failed due to missing data. It failed because no one in that room could legally believe it. What do you think, was he right to fire someone for refusing to hand over a personal USB tied to legal authorization if you believe that decision made sense? Comment reasonable. But if you don't support that kind of action, comment mistake. I'm really curious to see where you stand on this. I didn't need confirmation that the meeting had collapsed. The silence afterward was enough, followed by the kind of activity that only happens when people realize they've made an irreversible mistake. My phone lit up before I even started the engine. 1 missed call, then 3, then 12, all from Trevor. I let it ring each time, watching his name appear and disappear like a system error that couldn't resolve itself. He didn't leave a voicemail. He didn't need to. Urgency has a pattern. And I knew exactly what his sounded like. A few minutes later, the emails started. The first one came from HR, carefully worded, almost polite. Ophelia, there seems to have been a miscommunication regarding your termination earlier today. We would appreciate the opportunity to clarify. I didn't open it. The second was shorter, less polished, sent from a senior HR manager instead of a template. Please contact us as soon as possible. Then came the one that mattered. The CFO. No subject line, no unnecessary language. We need you back. Immediately. I stared at the screen for a moment. Not out of hesitation, but calculation. For 6 years. I had responded quickly, solved problems before they escalated, made myself available whenever the system needed stability. Now the system was unstable, and for the first time, I didn't move to fix it. I closed the laptop and placed my phone face down on the passenger seat. Control, I realized, isn't about access. It's about timing. They had just lost theirs. As I pulled out of the parking lot, another notification appeared, not from the company I had just left, but from a number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it. Almost. The message was brief, precise, and far more interesting than anything Trevor had to say. "We've been following your work for some time. Are you available to talk?" I smiled. Just slightly, because while they were trying to recover what they had lost, someone else had already recognized its value. I didn't rush into the meeting with their competitor. Power isn't something you chase, it's something you let come to you at the right moment. The office was quieter than the one I had just left. No urgency disguised as leadership, no noise pretending to be control, just a conference room, a screen, and 3 people who didn't waste time pretending they already knew everything. They had reviewed my work, not the titles, not the surface metrics, the architecture. One of them leaned forward, hands folded. "You don't manage data," he said. "You control validation." I didn't correct him, because that was the first accurate thing anyone had said to me all day. We spoke in specifics: authorization chains, audit triggers, regulatory exposure. No one asked me to move faster. They asked how systems fail, and more importantly, how they prove it when they do. Meanwhile, my phone remained silent on the table, face down. I already knew what was happening without checking. Back at my former company, the pipeline hadn't just slowed, it had stopped. Every deal connected to my validation layer was now suspended. Not rejected. Not erased, just frozen in a state that demanded proof no one there could provide. The system wasn't broken. It was waiting. Waiting for authorization that no longer existed inside that building. I watched the people across from me take notes. Not interrupting. Not rushing to conclusions. They weren't trying to control the system. They were trying to understand it. That difference mattered. As the meeting ended, I turned my phone over. Multiple new messages, internal escalation threads, legal inquiries, missed calls that no longer felt urgent, and then something more interesting. 3 separate notifications, all from major clients tied to the frozen pipeline. Each one carried the same request, phrased differently, but meaning exactly the same thing. They wanted full revalidation, not partial reviews, not explanations, everything. I looked up, meeting the eyes of the people across the table. They didn't ask what I was thinking. They already knew. Because when trust disappears, verification becomes the only currency left. By the time I left the competitor's office, the collapse was no longer theoretical. It had structure, timestamps, and a very specific financial footprint. I didn't need internal access to see it. The ripple was already public-facing. Delays, rescheduled calls, sudden silence from teams that usually moved fast. That kind of stillness doesn't come from confusion. It comes from restriction. Internal audit had been triggered. That only happens when the system detects patterns it cannot reconcile: unauthorized actions, incomplete validation chains, inconsistencies that require human review. Once that process begins, everything slows down by design. Then the number surfaced. Approximately $310 million in active transactions placed on hold. Not canceled, not lost, just locked behind a requirement no one inside that company could currently fulfill. Verification. I sat in my car again, watching the updates come in through secondary channels, each one confirming what I already understood. The system wasn't collapsing. It was enforcing its own rules. And then Trevor did exactly what I expected. She sabotaged us. The message appeared in an internal escalation summary that had already begun circulating beyond his control. Blame is predictable when authority is threatened, but compliance doesn't respond to emotion. A formal reply followed shortly after, precise and almost indifferent. "No, the system is functioning as designed." That sentence carried more weight than any accusation. because it shifted the narrative from personal conflict to structural truth. I opened the attached log file, not because I needed proof, but because I wanted to see how far he had gone. Override attempts, multiple entries, repeated within minutes of each other, each one flagged, each one recorded, each one tied directly to his credentials. He hadn't just ignored the process, he had tried to force it, and the system had documented every second of it. I closed the file slowly, the realization settling into something colder than satisfaction. This wasn't a failure, it was exposure. And for the first time, Trevor wasn't controlling the outcome, he was part of the evidence. I didn't return to the building as an employee. I returned with a contract, temporary consultant, external authority, no internal reporting line. The difference wasn't symbolic, it was structural. The boardroom felt familiar, but the tone had shifted, less noise, more calculation. People weren't trying to control the narrative anymore. They were trying to understand the damage. Trevor was already there. He didn't look surprised to see me. He looked prepared. "You caused this mess," he said before anyone else could speak. No greeting, no hesitation, just accusation, delivered like a final attempt to regain control of a situation that had already moved beyond him. I set my folder on the table and took my seat without rushing. "No," I said calmly. I prevented it from being illegal. That landed harder than I expected, not because of the words, but because of what followed them, silence. And then attention shifting away from Trevor. The general counsel leaned forward, fingers interlaced. "Let's clarify that," she said. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The system had already done the explaining. I was just translating it. The data presented in that meeting was not validated. I said, "Without proper authorization, it cannot be certified as accurate or complete. Presenting it as decision-ready would have created legal exposure." Trevor scoffed. "But it sounded thinner now. We had the data. You had numbers." I replied, "Not proof." That was when the legal counsel spoke again, this time without hesitation. If the deal had proceeded under those conditions, we could have been liable for misrepresentation, at minimum. It would have triggered regulatory review, at worst. Litigation. The room didn't react immediately, it absorbed. Trevor shifted in his seat, but for the first time. He didn't interrupt, because this wasn't opinion anymore. It was risk, defined in terms no executive could ignore. I opened the file I had brought, sliding it across the table. "Everything the system flagged is here," I said, "including override attempts. No one asked who made them. They already knew. And for the first time since I had walked out of this building, I wasn't defending my role. I was defining the boundary he had tried to cross. And this time, the system wasn't just enforcing it. The board was listening. By the end of that meeting, the outcome wasn't debated, it was processed. No one announced consequences in dramatic language. There were no raised voices, no symbolic gestures, just decisions, made in the same quiet tone the system had used all along. Trevor was suspended before the board left the room. Temporary, pending investigation, standard phrasing. But everyone there understood what it meant. Authority doesn't disappear all at once. It gets removed in layers. The CFO stepped in immediately as acting lead. Not out of ambition, but necessity. Someone had to stabilize what was still salvageable. Calls were scheduled, statements drafted, explanations prepared for investors who no longer trusted projections without proof. The deal was gone. $240 million. Paused indefinitely. Not because the numbers failed, but because the process behind them had been compromised. In this environment, credibility isn't negotiable. Once it fractures, it doesn't recover quickly. Reputation followed the same pattern. Partners began asking different questions, not about growth, but about controls, not about opportunity, but about risk. The company hadn't lost its data, it had lost confidence, and that's harder to rebuild. I stayed only as long as my contract required, long enough to restore validation pathways and ensure the system could function without manual interference, not to fix what happened, but to prevent it from repeating. Then the investigation findings began to surface. At first, They looked isolated. Minor inconsistencies, delayed validations, decisions pushed forward without proper review. But patterns don't stay isolated for long. The board expanded the scope. Historical data was pulled, prior deals re-examined, audit trails reconstructed with a level of scrutiny that hadn't been applied before. That was when the real issue appeared. Trevor hadn't just bypassed the system once, he had done it before, not as a mistake, but as a method, data selectively presented. Validation steps delayed until after decisions were made. Risk reframed as confidence. The system had recorded all of it. It just hadn't been asked to reveal it. Until now. And once it did. The outcome wasn't uncertain anymore. It was inevitable. I didn't celebrate when everything settled. There was no moment that felt like victory. Just a quiet return to structure, the kind that doesn't need recognition to function. The new contract was finalized without friction. Clear terms. Defined authority. And something my previous role never truly offered control over the validation framework itself. Not partial oversight, not conditional approval. Full ownership of the system that determined whether data could be trusted. The compensation reflected that. Double what I had earned before. But the number wasn't the point. Clarity was, at the new firm. No one asked me to move faster at the expense of accuracy. They asked how to ensure that speed never compromised truth. The conversations were different. Less about presentation, more about proof. Less about confidence, more about accountability. That difference changes everything. I rebuilt the validation architecture with one principle reinforced at every level. Authorization is not optional. It is the boundary between information and liability. Every data set, every projection, every decision passed through a system designed not just to process data, but to verify it beyond question. No shortcuts, no exceptions. Meanwhile, the company I left continued its internal restructuring, leadership adjustments, policy revisions, external communication designed to restore confidence that had already moved elsewhere. They didn't lose data. They lost the only person allowed to make it real. That realization doesn't arrive all at once. It unfolds slowly, in missed deadlines, delayed approvals, and questions no one can answer with certainty. I don't follow their updates closely anymore. I don't need to. The outcome was never about them. It was about understanding something most people overlook until it's too late. Integrity isn't a principle you announce. It's a system you build, protect, and refuse to compromise. And once you understand how that system works, you don't just participate in it. You control what becomes real. If you would have made the same choice I did, refusing to hand over something that could compromise integrity and standing your ground no matter the pressure, right, well done. So I know I made the right call. If you wouldn't have done that, feel free to write no, and if you're still thinking it through, trying to decide what you would do in that moment, you can write maybe, there's no perfect answer here, just real choices, real consequences, and the kind of decisions that quietly define who you are. There's a moment in life when you realize your value isn't what people say about you, it's what the system stops doing when you're gone. I learned that integrity isn't loud, it doesn't argue, it doesn't beg, and it doesn't rush to prove itself. It simply stands its ground. Even when that comes with a cost. Saying no didn't make me difficult, it made me responsible. And in a world that often rewards speed over truth, choosing to do the right thing quietly becomes a kind of strength most people underestimate. If this story resonates with you, if you've ever had to protect your worth when no one else would, then you're already part of something stronger than you think. This isn't just my story. It's about anyone who refuses to trade integrity for approval. If you believe in that, consider subscribing, sharing your thoughts in the comments, and letting others hear this message too. Because when one person chooses integrity, it stays personal, but when many do, it becomes a standard. This story was fully created and produced by our team. We do not copy or borrow content from any other channel. Thank you for staying with us and listening until the end.